In this chapter, we're going to take a look at one of my favorite new things about theming in Drupal 7, the ability to create preprocess functions for theme functions. What we're going to do is make some changes to how usernames are output on the page. If we take a look at our mockup, you can see that it's not actually using someone's username, like the name admin or something like that. It's actually printing out the user's full name as the author of this node here. What I'd like to do is make it so that on our site, we have the ability for users to enter in their real name as part of their profile. And then instead of printing out their username, we print out their real name wherever they're displayed as the author of a post. So let's take a look at how we can do that. The first thing we'll need to do real quick is make it so that users can actually enter in a username or a real name for their profile. So I'm going to do that by going to Configuration, Account Settings, and then Manage Fields. This will allow me to add some fields onto my user object. I'm just going to create a new field and call it real name. And we'll just make it a standard text field for now. And click Save. We can leave all the settings as the default, since all we really need at this point is the ability for someone to enter in some text into the text field. So I'll leave all those settings the same as well. Scroll down and click Save. Once I've done that, I'll just drag this field up here so it appears next to the user's name on the form or on the user profile form. And now, when I go to a user's profile and edit them, I should see that real name field on the user's profile, and I can go ahead and fill it out. So I'll give this user a real name, like Joe Schindler, and then save the account. Close the window. You can see now it shows the person's real name. And if I navigate back to the home page, what I'd like to do now is instead of displaying the username here as the posted by or author for this article, I'd like to display the user's real name, in this case, Joe Schindler. In order to do that, there are a couple of things that I could do. One of them would be to override the theme_username function, and instead of outputting the username, simply output the real name. What I'd like to do instead, however, is take a look at using a preprocess function for the theme username function in order to replace that value with the user's real name. As an example of how this works, let's take a look at documentation on api.drupal.org. If I look up the documentation for theme username, you can see that it says, see also, template preprocess username down here. I'm going to click on that and take a look at this. This is an example of a preprocess function for the theme username function provided by Drupal core. What this preprocess function is doing is a bunch of things like figuring out, is the currently logged in user allowed to view user profiles? If so, maybe I should make the username a link to their profile. Is it an anonymous user whose name I'm trying to print? And if so, should I just print the text anonymous, not verified? A whole bunch of complicated PHP logic in order to just sort of print out the user's name at the very end. What we're going to do is create an additional preprocess function for the theme username function. So back over in our template.php file, we need to create a new function. So we're in the 960 robots template.php file, and I'm going to create a new preprocess function. This is a lot like creating preprocess functions for template files, like the 960 robots preprocess node that we created before. It's all based on a naming convention. So I'm going to create a new function named 960 robots underscore preprocess username. And just like our template file preprocess functions, this function will take one variable. We'll call it variables, and we'll make sure that it's passed by reference so that we can make changes to it, and all of those changes are then passed on to the theme function. This preprocess function name is again based on a naming convention. It's the name of our theme, 960 robots, underscore the word preprocess, and then the portion of the theme function minus the word theme for the function that we are trying to create a preprocess function for. So in this case, I'm creating a preprocess function for the theme underscore username theme function. I'm going to take the word theme here and replace that with 960 robots underscore preprocess. And that's how I end up with a preprocess function for this specific theme function. For the breadcrumb theme function, for example, if I wanted a preprocess function for that, I would name the function 960 robots underscore preprocess underscore breadcrumb. I'm going to start by simply printing out the variables array here so that we can see what we're dealing with. I'll use the kpr function provided by the devel module in order to print out this variables array. So I'll add kpr $variables, save that. If I switch back over to my site and refresh, I should see that variables array printed out once for every time there's a username printed on this page. So in this case, once for every node on the front page. In order to make it a little easier to see what we're looking at, I'm going to go ahead and just click on this first node here. And now we should see it printed out just once for that node. We're also seeing it up here at the top a second time. That's because it's outputting our username. You can see up here, admin, inside of the toolbar. So this first one is relating to the username being printed out here in the toolbar. And then the second one is related to our username being printed out as part of this article node. I can go ahead and inspect this and see what's inside of that variables array. If I take a look at what's inside of the variables array, one of the things I see is this key of name with a value of Shaspusis. So this is the user's name, and this is their actual name, the value that's being printed out on the page. What I'd like to do inside of my preprocess function is replace this value here with the user's real name. I should be able to get that information by using the user ID that's part of this account object. So if I open up the account object here, you'll see that the user ID is a part of what's in this object. There's also a bunch of additional information. In this case, because it's a node, most of the information here is related to the node that's being viewed and not the actual user. But what we can do is use this UID property to load all of the information about this user, including their real name. So if I switch back over to our code, what I'm going to do is create a new variable named account and use the user load function in order to load information or the full account for that user. I'll use the UID property from inside of this variables array. So inside of variables, you'll remember there was a key named account, which was an object, and one of the properties of that object was the user ID. So this will use the user load function to load the complete object representing the user with this particular user ID. Once I've done that, let's go ahead and print out that new account variable and see what's inside of that. I'll switch back over and refresh. And now what I should see is that actual account object. So again, still inside of our preprocess function, but now we have some additional information. We've got this account object. And one of the things on that account object is this real name field that we added. So I can go ahead and click through that just to get an idea of what's there. And I can see that the value of this real name field is indeed the name that we entered for this user's account. So Joe Schindler here. All right. Now, back in my code, I can make use of that information to replace the key of this variables array of name with the value of the real name field from our account object that we just loaded. The code to do that looks something like this. The first thing we'll want to do is use the PHP isSet function to make sure that there's actually a value for this real name field on this particular user account. Because it's not required, it's possible that a user may not have filled out the real name field, in which case we still want to print out just their regular username. So we're checking inside of the account object in the real name field. We want to make sure that we're using the value here, this key of safe_value, instead of the one that we saw that was named just value. Safe_value in this case tells me that this value, or the real name here, has been run through Drupal security functions like checkplain to make sure that the value that is being output to the screen is safe for it to be rendered as HTML inside of a browser, so it doesn't contain JavaScript or anything like that. If that value exists, I'm going to go ahead and replace the value of this name key with that real name field value. Once I've done that, the theme username function that's responsible for printing out the user's name will use this new value in place of the username when printing it out on the screen. So if we switch back and click refresh, we should see, instead of the user's name, we're now seeing the real name printed out. It's still linked to the user profile just as we expected. This works because we created a preprocess function for the theme username function, which is being used to print out this user's name on the screen. If I go back and look at the code for theme username to see how that's working, you can see here that what it's outputting as part of the username is the value of the name key from that variables array that we modified inside of our preprocess function. So by changing the value of this key to the user's real name, their real name is what's now being printed out as the link to their profile. Using preprocess functions for theme functions means that even inside of our theme functions, like theme username, we can do a majority of the sort of heavy PHP logic inside of a separate preprocess function and keep that separate from the theme function, which can be focused on just outputting the HTML necessary for the page.